So it looks like the flow of people has slowed down a little bit, so we can get started. My name's Dan Garlington, and I've put together this class in the past to help out folks in my team, and it's sort of expanded and expanded. So this time we're videotaping it, so someone could watch the videos. Maybe I won't have to repeat it, but I do enjoy it. So today we're going to kind of start with just the basics of what's the data warehouse, and then we'll start digging into SQL. And then after we do that, then we'll flip to the ETL manager and actually plug the SQL we've written in and get it to run. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything just before we start, but not really. So.
Dan, can you be louder? Yeah, you're pretty soft.
Oh, am I? Okay. All right. I normally don't have that trouble, but I'll try and project more while I'm in here. All right. So the data warehouse. Some of you have probably used it. Some of you have probably run some ETL queries. Some of you may have used the DSS user interface. Some of you have maybe not used it at all. So I just wanted to start with a couple basics about it. The data warehouse is this collection of tables, and there's over 1,300 tables in there. And it's what's known as a relational database, that the tables are related to each other. And it stores copies of the data from production databases. So, for example, there's a procurement database that has all the PO information, and that's not in the data warehouse. The data warehouse has a copy of that information. And each of those tables in the data warehouse has columns of data in it. And there may be multiple tables for a single subject area, or there may be just one. And they're all copies of the production database. And that copy is done, in almost all cases, it's done every night. And so the most recent snapshot or the most recent data you'll see is from the day before. And SQL is the programming language that allows us to pull data out of those tables. So it's programming language designed for managing these relational databases. And the SQL queries are made up of clauses, which are kind of sections. And each clause will contain expressions and conditions, depending on what type of clause it is. And you don't have to worry about that just yet. It'll make more sense. So SQL can be used to create and manage tables, which we won't be covering. It can be used to load data into existing tables, which we also won't be covering. Or it can be used to pull data out of tables, which is the most common use case, and that's what we'll be covering in this class. So digging into SQL, there's really two clauses that you have to have in a SQL query of the type we're running to get data out of the database. The first is select, and the select clause defines what columns you want to extract from the tables and that you want included in the results when the results publish. And the other that you need is a from clause, and the from clause tells Oracle what tables the data you want is in and how they're related to each other when you start joining. All right. It's very forgiving, SQL. Some programming languages, if you have a carriage return or if you have an extra space or anything like that, it'll not run. Even VBA is like that. SQL is very forgiving. You can uppercase, lowercase, extra spaces, tabs, line breaks, all of that, for the most part, doesn't cause any issues. We'll cover some exceptions to that. And you'll see that I use in terms of upper and lowercase, you'll see that I tend to use a specific pattern that helps me read the SQL, but it's totally optional. But the order of the clauses, you can't put your from clause before your select clause. Select clause always comes first. Then you've got your from clause, and then it's best practice to always end your query with a semicolon. So we will start with writing a query. So starting with that skeleton, if you will, the select and from clauses, and then that semicolon at the end. We can then, in the from clause, we tell it what table or tables the information is in. So in this case, the table is called product groups, and that's a table of just basically all the GL codes and what product group they are in like a description field. And then in the select clause, we say what columns we want from that table. And a little shorthand is an asterisk if you just want all the columns in the table. So I try to think of what was the simplest SQL query I could write, and select star, so select everything from the product groups table. And that's what the results would look like. So it's all the columns. This one only has 7 columns. And it's all the information, because we haven't filtered it in any way. And it's in kind of a random order, all of which we'll talk about solutions to filtering and ordering either today or next week. And you can be more specific, obviously, than just show me all the columns. So the select clause, where we list the columns we want, you can list them and put a comma between them, and that will just return those specific columns. And you'll notice the way, this is a style thing, but you'll notice that I put the comma after product group. Right before description, not after product group. And there's a reason for that. If I wanted to get rid of the description column, if the comma was on the line before it, I would have to delete that line and then go back and find that comma and delete that comma. If I put the comma in front of the column that necessitates the comma, then I can just delete that row without leaving a lingering comma there, which is a very, very common error you see when people are just starting to write SQL. They can't figure out what's wrong, and it's commas that are left behind, or missing commas in some cases. So I like to stick it in front of the column that necessitates it. We pick a short nickname for each table and just put it right after the table name. So our table name is product groups, and we'll put PG after product groups with just a space. Usually what most people do is pick kind of the first letters of each word in the table. And so in this case, PG. And so now we can refer to the table anywhere else in the query excuse me, with just PG. And so we'll specify in front of each column that this column is from the table PG, and we do that just putting the PG in front of it and then a period. And it makes it clear which column, which table each column is derived from. And as I said, it gets sort of necessary as you begin joining multiple tables together, which we'll do in a few weeks. The other kind of alias, and important not to mix these up, but the other kind of alias is a column alias. So if I ran this right now, the column names would be product underscore group and description, which might be just fine, but maybe I'd rather they were something else. And so I can put what I want the column to be called in my results after the expression itself. So, and I like to use the as. It's not necessary, but it's it kind of breaks apart the column name and the column alias. And so, yeah, so if we did that, added GL underscore code and GL underscore name as the column aliases for the 2 columns in our results, you'll see in the results, those are now the names of those columns. Now, there's a couple restrictions in this. If you tried to put spaces, like GL space code or GL space name, it's going to freak out. It sees that space and thinks that the alias is over and it's time to move on to the next thing. And so if you absolutely need spaces, if you're presenting this is going to be sent as an email to your boss every day, and they really want spaces in the name of the column headers, or it just makes sense, use double quotes around the column alias, and then you can put basically whatever you want in there. There is, I think, an upper limit on how many characters, so it's best to keep them brief. But all right, and then a little note about quotes. A lot of people are familiar, and you use Microsoft products every day, or you use your Outlook, your Word, your Excel, and a lot of people, because they're comfortable with those programs, will start writing their SQL in those programs. Unfortunately, all Microsoft products, the single quote and double quote characters are different than the characters that Oracle needs. And so it's best to do your coding in Notepad or Notepad++. Notepad++ is available in advertised programs. It's listed as open source Notepad++. And it's a great program for writing SQL. You can actually specify the language as SQL, and it'll highlight and color things nicely. It can also let you indent blocks all at once. So that's something to just be aware of. You'll get an invalid character error if you accidentally end up with one of those Microsoft quotes.
Could smart quotes will it be
I'm not sure. Yeah, I didn't know that was an option, so yeah, I've never tested that. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good.
Would you mind going back one slide? And I'm asking kind of a dumb question because last time this class was so hard for me, so I don't want to be confused at the beginning. I'm totally following the alias for the thing you have in quotes, the GL name, and how it appears in the column. I'm not understanding the little PGs everywhere still.
Sure.
Like I just can't quite wrap my brain around what it's doing in each of those spots.
Sure. So, so in this query, the table that we're using is come over here. Is product groups, right? And in our select clause, we tell Oracle what are the columns that we want. And in this case, we only have one table. So by default, these must be columns from this table. But later on, as we start having multiple tables, some of those tables might have the same column, like ASIN. It's a very common column to find in different tables. You might be joining two tables together that both have an ASIN column. And if we just said select ASIN, and from this table and this table and this table and this table, it wouldn't know which of those tables it should be pulling that ASIN from. And so we give product groups a little nickname. So
the bottom line there from product groups PG is where you're actually assigning.
Yep, exactly right, yeah.
And then the dot that's before it is just saying it's attributed.
Yeah, the description column is from the table PG, which is the product groups table.
And obviously product group is from product group.
Yeah.
Or group and groups, so it is slightly different.
Product group is a column within the product groups.
So this is our first column, product group, and this is our second column, description. And we're just saying this column is from the table PG, which is this, as well as this one's from PG. But if we had multiple tables, there could be multiple different aliases, table aliases at work there.
Okay, I think that's good to know.
Okay. And there's also, I won't go through all of them. There's more that you can do with the select clause than just columns. You can do just like here we have a column, which is warehouse ID, right after the select. But you could also have just kind of literal things like the number 13, and in that case, the number 13 would be in every row of your results. You can do math. You can use functions. You can use pseudo columns. There's a little bit more of that in your reading, but most of the time you're going to be working with columns, especially initially. So I'm not going to go through all of that right now. I mentioned earlier that the results of this query totally not sorted. It's going to just kind of pick at random which columns to return first, second, third. But you can control that with a third clause, the order by clause. And by adding that order by clause, we're telling it's basically going to run the select and from, take those results, and then order them in the way that we specify. So in this case, if we order by product group from the table PG, which we know is the product groups table, then we'll get the results in that specific order. So it starts with -1.
I want to make it descending like.
Yep. The default sort order is ascending, so starting with -1, 0, 1, 14, 15. But you can make it descending by adding DESC right after the column. That's a great question, yeah. So in this case, 437 is the highest product group number, and then it goes down from there. And you can also have multiple things that you're ordering by, just like in Excel, where maybe you sort by this and this and this, and in this order. You can do the same thing here, and by just separating the things that you want to order by with commas. And it is in that order, so it's going to order by the date first, then the product groups. So we get all the December 14th creation dates, and then sorted by the product group. And you can also use that descending string there to specify on each thing in the order by. You could order by, in this case, since the default is ascending, it's ordering by the creation date, ascending, and then the product group descending. And so we get, of all the things created on the first date in the table, the smallest date in the table, which is December 14th, 1999, the largest product group in that is 60. And then it kind of goes down from there, so descending.
Excuse me.
Uh-huh.
Question. If you have given another name to, for instance, product group, like it's product group as GL code, do you tell them order by product group or by the name you set for that column?
you would go with the non-alias, the actual column name. Yeah, that's usually safest. I think there are some cases where it will recognize the alias, but I can't remember which. And so the order by clause, one big caveat of it is it has to run your whole query, and then it takes those results and it orders them. So it's adding a whole level of operations that it has to do on top. And so it's not super efficient, especially as you start getting into bigger and bigger queries. It can push your query from past the line of running within an hour to taking over 2 hours, potentially. It can also use up temp space. And so use it if you need it. Otherwise, I usually leave it out and then deal with sorting the results in Excel if that makes sense to the audience. All right.
Dan, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Some point in the last couple of weeks, you sent a example file that we could use to kind of play around with. Sound familiar?
The O'Reilly DDL workspace.
Yes. Okay. I just was making sure that I couldn't find it. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can remind me at the end, and we'll
Okay.
kind of do a quick demo of that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to hop out of PowerPoint here because a bunch of pictures of this probably won't be super valuable. And instead, I'm going to go to datanet.amazon.com. And so now we'll look at the ETL side of things. And now that we can write a simple SQL query, how do we get the results out of the data warehouse? And the ETL manager is an interface that allows you to do that. And ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. And what we're doing is extracts. We're extracting data out of the database. So if you go to datanet.amazon.com, it takes you to kind of this landing page where you have all these tabs of different things available. You've got the ETL manager, you've got DSS, you've got various metrics and BI metadata that we're going to cover in a week or two. Contact Us, which has a whole list of different resources. It's not just a Contact Us tab. I tried to lobby for that to be changed to something else, but there's tons of good information in there, videos, all sorts of stuff. So for our purposes today, we're going to want to go to the ETL Manager tab. And then what we want to do, you're going to have this little box here, and depending on what your permissions are, you'll have just a few things or a bunch of things. But the one that we want is data feed. And so we'll just click on that, and that'll give us the starting point of creating a SQL query, an ETL manager run SQL query. And so down here is where we can paste in our SQL, and I should grab something from over here. Let's just grab this. Whoops. Oh, I got to grab it from the other window. You can tell I use PowerPoint a lot, huh? All right. Let's see. See how that does. All right. So we can just paste our SQL into the big box at the bottom, and then we have to give it a description, and that it's free form. You don't have to worry about underscores or anything like that. A lot of times with people starting out, I'll suggest they start with just their login. That way it's easy to keep track of which are the queries that you created. For groups, then it can make more sense to leave that off if it's something kind of in production that you're running. But it's a good starting point. And then just something descriptive. And so this is a list of product groups. So then we'll scroll down to the bottom and over, apparently, because my window's acting funny. And then just save that. And that we've created now we've created a new ETL job profile. And we've loaded it with our SQL here at the bottom. And so now it knows what SQL to run, but it doesn't know certain other parameters. It doesn't know what you want to do with the results. So we'll start top to bottom here, and we'll create a publisher. And so this second section down allows you to create one or more publishers for it. And we'll start with by clicking the New button. And there's multiple types that you can choose from. But today, we're going to just do email. It's the simplest, most straightforward one. I think next week or the week after, we'll look at Windows Share, which allows you to publish to ant-dept locations, for example. So we'll just pick email. And then, again, it wants a description. Often I'll just copy-paste the main description that it has up there. We want to set a format. And since it's an email, HTML is often the cleanest way to look at it. But you can also pick text file. Load file is basically a tab-limited text file without any headers. So if that's of use to you, we'll go with HTML. For now, I'll leave the encoding as is. And then we'll just type in the email address that we want to send it to. And if you have more than one, it wants them separated by commas, not by semicolons. It'll error out if you do semicolons. There we go. So I'll send it to the class mailing list and to myself. And then again, there should be a save button somewhere down in the lower right. Slowly but surely, there we go. And so now we've got the profile has the SQL we want to run. We have told it what we want to do with the results after it runs. And so now we just have to create a job that tells it some of the specific parameters that need to be used. And that is this next section down where it says the above job profile is being used for these jobs. And the new button for that is over on the right. So we'll do a new one in there. And this one, the description defaults to whatever was your main description, and then it puts job for profile in front of it. I usually delete that because, of course, it's a job. And then a few of these things are required, and a lot of them aren't. So I'll just show you the ones that are mandatory. So the time zone you need to select. The warehouse you can leave blank. Host group, leave as is. Freeform tag for now, leave blank. Group, it's going to default to personal, but if you're in one of the DW groups, these allow you to share ownership of queries with anyone else in that group, so anyone else could edit them or run them. I'll just, let's see. Maybe I'll just leave it personal for now, considering.
How do you know if you will have stuff under group?
You'll have to have at least one group, and then beyond that, it's usually like other people in your area will know. DSS queries are sort of they have the same functionality, so if people can share DSS queries across, then it's if you've done DSS queries shared within the group, then it would be the same. Yeah. Priority there, it defaults to normal. But you can change it to anything up to business critical. Business critical is not allowed for personal jobs, but it is allowed for group jobs. So I'll just put it on highest so we can get this to run quickly. The priority defines where in the queue of people waiting for their jobs to run that your query inserts itself. So the low priority jobs, you're at the back of the line. Normal priority, you cut in front of all the low people. If you do high priority, you cut in front of all the normal people, and so on. So if your SVP's, breathing down your neck about something, then crank it up to business critical, but don't set all your jobs at business critical just because you're impatient, because that sort of destroys the whole community and the whole point of the prioritization. So so we'll just put it at highest, which means I'm sort of cutting and all that, but partition type. So this will make more sense in the coming weeks as we start talking about partitions and start using where clauses and things. But for now, I would say default to marketplace and select the marketplace that's relevant to you. As we start to understand more of joins and different tables and partitions, you want to keep the partition type you select here relevant to the tables you're using. The table we're using doesn't have any partitioning, so it doesn't really matter what we select here. So I'm just going to pick Marketplace 1. And then down here, you can leave all of this blank. There's the scheduling section that we'll talk about, I think, next week. And then you've got the logical database should default to L-DW, and that's the data warehouse proper. You can technically use the ETL manager to query other databases, but it's unlikely that you have a long list of those. DB user, this is all the different user IDs available to you to run your query, and each user has different permissions potentially. The ones that end in RO tend to be the ones you want to use, because the RO stands for read-only. So there's apps row, DSS row, retail row, ops row. So I'll just pick ops row as my favorite for some reason. And then extract type, we've got transform, incremental, and data feed. I just leave this as data feed.
The DB user, does it matter which one you pick?
If you start querying verts and things like that, it could, like sandbox tables and that sort of thing. Yeah, so right now, just pick one of the read-only accounts and you'll be fine. You can hit anything in the data warehouse proper with one of those read-only accounts. Yeah.
It gives you access to all the same information.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Why there's multiple read-only accounts, I'm not sure, but yeah, they all should have the same permissions essentially. All this section is brand new, and I don't know anything about it, and so we'll just go ahead and hit save.
Question on the time zone.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm trying to get something to publish even faster, or at different times, can I leverage the system at all by changing the time zones?
I'm not sure. It definitely is taken into account when it's deciding whether the query is ready to run, but I don't know. I've never tried to use it to change it over to Japan and see if it runs 9 hours sooner or whatnot. Yeah.
If that doesn't have an effect, does it affect when the data is pulled by changing the time zones?
It shouldn't, no. Yeah. I'm not actually sure specifically how it's used, but I suspect it has something to do with the dependencies and whether that region has been loaded or something like that. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't know enough about it to speak knowledgeably. All right. So now that we've filled out those 3 sections, we've got the profile created with the SQL at the bottom. We created a publisher to tell it what we want to do with the results. And then we've created a job that's defined what database we're going to pull from, what user we're going to use to do it, what priority this is. And it's assigned that a number. So now we can click on this little run button. And it wants to know a data set date. For now, I would recommend everyone just always pick yesterday's date, because yesterday's data is loaded into the data warehouse. Today's data has not yet loaded because today's not over yet. And so if you picked today's date, it would wait until tomorrow to run because it wouldn't see the data yet. So for now, pick yesterday. As we start to do some wildcard stuff, you can pick additional dates. Do you have a question?
Yeah. For tables that backfill when new information is provided or we have async migration and stuff, if you pick a data set date that's in the past, let's say in 2011, will it provide the data as it was in 2011, or will it provide are they snapshots, or is there only one source?
That's a good question. So there's a few different types of tables in the data warehouse. There's tables like product groups that are just kind of I can't remember the name of what type they are, but they're basically just like a list of values and the corresponding things that you kind of use, almost like a VLOOKUP. And then there's tables that are snapshots in time. A classic example of that is the inventory tables. You've got what inventory looked like at the end of yesterday, the end of the day before, the end of the month, all that. And so that one's depending on whether you use run date wildcards in your SQL, which we'll talk about in the future, that can control or relate the day you're picking here with what snapshot you're looking at. It won't automatically unless you're using that wildcard in your code. And then the third type of table is more sort of transactional, like the orders table or purchase orders tables, where it's just kind of collecting new data every day. And so that wouldn't have any snapshots of what things look like in the past. So it's a great question. All right, so we'll pick yesterday's date, and then we'll click Run Job. And this should then kick it off, put it at in the appropriate place in the queue based on priority. And the first thing it's going to do is check the dependencies, check to see if that table has been loaded yet for the day that I picked and all that. And if we refresh here, we'll kind of watch it move through. Yeah, so now it's waiting for the dependencies, and it was checking them, and now it's actually noticed that all the dependencies have been met. So we should see it if I keep refreshing here. It's going to run really fast, so we might miss the executing phase. Oh, no. Okay, so now it's waiting for resources. So this means that it's ready to run. Now it just needs one of the data warehouse instances to give it. It needs to get to the front of the line in one of those instances.
How far back does the date sets go?
Does the what now?
How far back does the different date sets go? Does it go back to like 2001 or?
It depends on the table. So next week we'll look at how to see how far back the data goes for different tables. There's different retention policies for different tables. Some of them are as little as 14 days of data for really, really granular data. Some of them are all, meaning there's data going back to the 90s. Yeah, it's very table specific, but I'll show you next week where you can find that. All right, so waiting for resources. So we're in the queue. We're waiting for our turn for our query to run, which sometimes feels like the DMV and sometimes doesn't. So it kind of jumped from executing and then through publishing into success. So, and some of the information that we can see on this job run page, we've got how many rows were produced as a result of our query. You got some timestamps and things. Over on the right, you've got kind of the basic information about the job. You've got the job profile ID right here. You've got the job ID, so that's the ID specific to that section. We'll talk more about that stuff in the future. You can go straight to editing either of those things. So if you want to edit the SQL, that's part of the profile. If you want to edit the scheduling or the database or things like that, that's part of the job. And then if something had gone wrong, we'll talk more about this, I think, next week or the week after. These buttons start to come into play, and you can bump your query up in priority. You can force dependencies if you know they're met and it's just can't tell for some reason, things like that. You can force a job to delete it. You can kill a session that's running. But we'll go into more of that in the future. All right, so since our job is in success, in theory, we should have an email, hopefully. Where would it go? There it is, yeah. So this sent us an email. It's in HTML format, so it's got that nice grid around it and blue and yellow and all our information. Let's see, what else do we want to... all right. So sometimes you're coming in and you want to find a job that you've already created. Maybe you want to go kick it off or you want to edit it. One way you can do that is if we go back to the main ETL Manager tab. There's a couple places you can click on this, but there's this My Jobs, and it's over here as well. And if you click on that, it's going to take you to all the jobs that that you're either in that group or it's one of your personal jobs. And this may be a few or a lot.
How do you tell which ones are yours versus like ones you actually created versus ones you're in?
That's a great question. So the group that's selected here will indicate what it matches to that drop down that we did in the job where we selected group. So if you selected personal there, this will just say personal, so you can tell them apart.
What if you created a query but read the group Book Buyers US?
Then it would be listed as Book Buyers US here.
There's no way to sort on. Show me only the ones I created.
Not simply. Yeah, if you put your name in the description, that's an easy way to find it. You can also use the advanced search, which has all sorts of options of somewhere in here. I can't remember exactly where. yeah, I won't waste class time with me stumbling around, but you can use the advanced search if you really just need to see all the ones that you created.
You don't know where it is, I'm never
Yeah, in my experience, generally, you're going to want to, the My Jobs tends to be the interface that you use to find the things that you're looking for. And this filter box is particularly handy. So if I was just looking for any job that had started with my login, it gives me, or that has my login anywhere in it actually, it'll filter the list dynamically down to that. And so if I wanted to see all of them that have the number 001, they're there. So that filter's very handy in that regard. Another page that you can get to your jobs if they've run is this DWP console. Which is just the next tab over from ETL Manager. And this is a list of all the jobs that have been run in any of your groups or by you personally. And the display options are over here on the left that you can select, oh, I only want to see ones for certain time zones. I only want to see those for maybe trade-in and, oops. You can say I only want to see ones that are scheduled. I want them for the 20th through the 23rd. And we'll just leave that all. And then once you've set those, you can hit this little refresh button within that window, and it'll refilter down the results for you. Here we go. So this is all the jobs in the group trade-in that have run or been attempted to run in that time range. You've got the date. And you've got all these sort of status columns. And so these correspond to those statuses that our query passed through when we were running it, where it starts with it's brand new, then it's waiting for dependencies, and then it's waiting for resources, and then it moves through runnable, and then executing, and then publishable publishing, and then hopefully success and occasionally error. If you want to see what those queries are, you can just click on the number. So if we're interested in what are these 2 queries that are waiting for dependencies in the trade-in space, click on that. And it will show us, here we are, a list of all the job runs that are in that status for that group. And so we've got these 2. It tells us what the status is. Tells us, well, not a lot right now, but time zone, status. If you want to get back to that job run detail page, this run ID, if you click on the run ID, that will take us straight to that familiar job run detail page. And we can see it's waiting for dependencies. It's waiting for this table to load. That's the dependency that it's waiting on. So we can know, why is it waiting? What's it waiting on? And if we knew that this query didn't really need to wait on that, we could force dependencies, but that can be risky. Data warehouse usually knows what's going on better than we do. So, yeah. Let's flip through this just to see if there's anything else I'm forgetting to cover in the ETL space. I think that is about it. Yeah. Were there any other questions that came up today? Yeah.
How do I decide that I have to click on the button force all dependencies to get it faster? How do I decide that?
How do you decide whether it makes sense to force dependencies? You only want to force dependencies if you know that the dependencies that it's waiting on don't need to be waited on. So the main use case I see is if you're doing a query for data way in the past, so the run date you selected when you ran the query was maybe a year ago. Some tables might get kind of stuck because of that. Usually those sort of lookup tables like product groups or a list of the ASIN and what its item name is, those types of tables that aren't snapshot tables, they're just kind of whatever's in there today is what's in there. Those sometimes get stuck in past backfills, and so that's usually the only case when I force dependencies.
force all dependent, I'll probably get some incomplete data, like some of the columns will not be loaded or something.
Yeah. You could end up with blank columns or no results or something like that. So it can be risky. Yeah.
So if I have a specific business question that I want to, start working on for this class, how do I know which tables and elements and all of that?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's the sort of that first stumbling block. Okay, I know what I want, but I don't know where to get it. And next week we'll go into that in a lot more detail of this BI metadata tab here that has just it's an incredible resource that rolled out a couple years ago that you can search on any keyword and it'll find any table that has that keyword either in the table name or a column in that table or in a description of a column in that table. It's very handy for tracking down what you need. If you're in the retail teams, in the back, the 103rd page of the training manual, there's a list of a lot of the commonly used tables that can kind of give you good starting points for things like inventory, purchase orders, customer orders, things like that. Yeah. Any other questions? Don't be afraid to speak up.
The PowerPoint's available?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I'll send the links out after class today. Yeah. Let me see what else I had. Oh. All right. I forgot to show you my nerdy t-shirt. Let's see. It's gonna... There we go. So if you want to copy this is like a one-page cheat sheet I put together. Most of it's stuff we haven't covered yet, but it's kind of like a one-page you could tag up on in your cube or your office, and as a reminder of like what's that thing and what order are the clauses and that sort of stuff. So I'll put that here if anybody wants to grab one of those. And then I had a few things I wanted to bring up. Next time we meet is in this room again at the same time. After that, it starts to kind of move days and things. So make sure you have all the, where we're going to be each week. I definitely recommend reading the section before class so that you kind of come to class with questions in your mind of the things that didn't make sense in the manual. And attempt the homework. One way people have been attempting the homework is as a study group. They meet with a study group of other people in their area that are taking the class as well, and you can all kind of work on the homework together and answer each other's questions. If you're in the U.S. books or the Canada teams and you create a study group, let me know and I can try and find a mentor who can maybe even come to your study group or things like that to help you out. Let's see. There's an answer key in the back of your training manual for all the homework questions. You may come up with a different solution that's just as valid as the example answer in the back of the book. So keep that in mind. You may not have the exact same thing, but if it runs and it gives you what you expected, then it's perfectly valid. Anybody that's in the class, I would recommend signing up to the Dan G SQL class alias. That's where I'll send out the after class, the PowerPoint and what the main topics to make sure that you understood. I recommend everybody sign up to ETL users. It's the community worldwide of everyone that uses ETL Manager, and it's a really great resource for questions if you have them about your query's not working, you can't figure out why. Throw a question in there with a good descriptive subject line because there's so much volume. You want to catch people's attention with that subject line and catch the attention of the people that may be able to answer your question. And then for folks on the 12th floor of Ruby, again, the Books in Canada folks, I set up this NA Books ETL user, so it's kind of a smaller version of the same, so we can kind of all help each other out. I think that's all I have today, unless there's any other questions. Is there anything I went over too quickly you want to revisit?
Question. If you want to edit, say the job that you just created.
Great question. Yeah, let's go back to that guy. Let's see. Go to my jobs, and I'll track down that one we just created. All right, and So there it is. So I'll click on that guy. This will take me to the profile page with all the different sections. If I want to edit the SQL is part of the profile, so I'll click this Edit Profile button. And that would take me, or even if I just want to edit the description. There we go. So that will allow me to edit the SQL. If I wanted to change something about the publisher, each publisher will have a little edit button there. And then if I wanted to change something about the job, there's a little edit button right next to run there. So if you want to change any of those sections, that you can go back and do that. And you'll be able to change, again, if you're in a group and the job's in a group, anybody in the group can edit them, any of those sections, definitely.
If the job is already running and I just go ahead and edit the profile and make some changes in the SQL, that job is not going to get affected. We have to create a new job for those changes too.
Generally speaking, yeah. Yeah, it kind of depends on, I think, where it is in the queue, whether it's, if it started executing already, it's already decided what SQL it's going to use. So, yeah. I think if you catch it early enough, it'll grab the SQL. Another handy, sort of, since we have a little extra time, some navigating around and finding things. This little stopwatch icon, if you wanted to go find that specific job run that we did, we click on that stopwatch and it's going to give us a list of all the times it's tried to run this query. And again, that job run is always going to take us back to that detail page. It's got what the status is and all that. If we go to the SQL tab, it'll actually show us what SQL it's going to run or it has run. The job run log, we'll talk more about in a week or two. It's where you'll find all the gruesome business intelligence details of what happened in the background. This becomes handy if a query errors out. You can track down what the reason is in there. Dependencies will show you more details of the dependencies that this query has. And then events will list just high-level things, and it's usually problems. So if a query doesn't have any problems, there aren't really any events that get captured here. But those are some of the useful navigation spots. And again, if you want to go from this job run to, again, all job runs, that stopwatch icon pops up again right here. And we can, even though there's only one, but it'll take us back to this page. So, yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks. And so next week we'll be talking about the where clause, which is it's going to allow us to start to filter the results down to just the rows we care about. And we'll start to we'll play with BI metadata, that interface to kind of see, okay, how do we find the data that we need, and how do we know what columns are in what tables. So that'll all start to make a lot more sense. Yeah. So great. Thank you.